Alright, so it's been a long break, but I think I ran out of steam during Lent, I was too busy during Lent. I don't think I couldn't have done it, I couldn't have done it, yes, so
That's
thank
okay.
you for.
What is it?
Science.
Oh, really?
Alright, so we are on, we're picking up at Revelation 7:9.
Page 1724.
Revelation 7:9, and just a quick review. So a quick review, chapter 1, we opened with John was praying on the Lord's Day, and Christ directs him to transcribe what he will hear and see. Chapters 2 and 3, we have the 7 letters to the 7 churches, which Christ dictated to John. Chapters 4 and 5, we have the scene in the throne room of God up in heaven. He's describing what it looks like, which is in line with some of the Old Testament visions of the throne room of God. Chapter 6, the action begins in chapter 6 with the opening of the first 6 seals. So there was a scroll with 7 seals, and in chapter 6, the first 6 are opened. The first 4 of the seals are the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, that famous image. And we discussed how they're really the imagery is the 4 henchmen of Mot, the Canaanite god of death. So these 4 demons that bring trouble to the earth and terrorize man. And then there's, before we get to the 7th seal, the opening of the 7th seal, in chapter 7, there's kind of an interlude in which John sees the church on earth, which this is where the number 144,000 comes in. So this is just chapter 7 verses 1 through 8. John sees the church on earth, which numbers 144,000, which is a symbolic number. It's not to be taken literally. The Jehovah's Witnesses, if you've ever had them come to your door, one of the first verses they'll point to, it's 144,000. And they have some weird theology about it, there are 144,000 who are the Jehovah's Witnesses who will not receive a body at the resurrection, but will remain like these perfect souls in heaven, which is just bizarre because the whole Christianity is a resurrectional religion. So I don't know, it would be a curse not to have your body back. So it's a weird theology. But anyway, so we got to get that out of our head. That there is exactly 144,000. What is that? It's this great multitude of the church on earth who are sealed in the name of God, and the seal they describe as this kind of X shape, which the church interprets in the, of course, as the sign of the cross. So they're sealed by God in the sign of the cross, and then now in 7:9. So the first 8 verses is talking about the church on earth and how they're protected by God, and now in 7:9 it's going to talk about the church in heaven, the church triumphant that's praising God. So 7:9. After these things I looked, and behold, so after these things doesn't necessarily mean chronologically, it just means he had another vision. I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. All the angels stood around the throne, and the elders, remember there were the 24 elders or presbyters, priests, and the 4 living creatures, remember those are the eagle, the man, the ox, and the lion, which represent traditionally the 4 gospel writers. And it fell on their faces before the throne and worshipped God, saying, Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom, thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen. All right, then he says, then 13, I'll just read a little more. Then one of the elders answered, saying to me, Who are these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from? And I said to him, Sir, you know. So it's like saying, I don't know, please tell me. So he said to me, These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation, and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Alright, so we're gonna focus on these figures who are there, who are clothed with white robes with palm branches in their hands, and it says in the end of verse 9. So he explains to them the ones that came out of the Great Tribulation. The Great Tribulation refers back to Daniel in the Old Testament, Daniel chapter 12, and the period of great suffering that God's people were to experience before the end of the age. And Daniel, in chapter 12, starting verse 1, talks about this great tribulation in the present tense, right? So it lasts from Daniel's time, from the return from exile in Babylon, about maybe 500 BC, when they come back to the land and they rebuild the temple, the second temple, to the present. So the ones in the white robes were the ones who had overcome this tribulation that took place over from 500 BC until the present. So this is written in 96 AD. And that's why they have palm branches, because it's signifying that they were victorious during this tribulation. They came through the tribulation. So what were the tribulations during this period? Well, first you have Alexander the Great conquers the Eastern world, and then he dies suddenly, and it breaks up, his empire breaks up into his generals, the successors. And the Seleucids were the ones who took over the area of the Near East, of the Holy Land, of Syria, etc. And when they get to the ruler Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who considered himself a god, he desecrated the temple with pig sacrifices. And so this was considered one of the tribulations that afflicted the people. And the Maccabees are the ones who kind of respond to this and rededicate the temple with Hanukkah. This is all recounted in Maccabees 1 through 4. And then the Maccabees make a mutual treaty with Rome, this kind of rising power of Rome, maybe 200 BC, something like that. And Rome ends up annexing them. And when Rome annexes them, takes them over, Pompey comes to kind of claim the land, and he marches right into the Holy of Holies, again desecrating the temple. So these are some of the tribulations. So what happens to the temple is considered kind of a figure for the suffering of the people. So the temple suffers with these pig sacrifices, with Pompey entering into the Holy of Holies. And interestingly, when he goes in there, he said, hey, there's nothing in there. The Holy of Holies is empty, because after the destruction of the temple, the things that were in there probably disappeared. And so there's actually nothing in there, and he's amazed at this. And he says, well, look at these people. They what's the Latin, mentis sola, that they worship God with the mind only, because the Greeks and Romans were used to having idols, so they would have expected to have an idol in the Holy of Holies or something. But he marvels that they could worship without any such thing. Alright, so that's the period of tribulation. And so these are the ones who suffered through this great tribulation to the land and to the temple. They had washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. We talked about this before, it sounds strange to say that washing in blood would make it white, but there's this idea that the blood is a cleansing agent. Remember, we talked about that before, that they would, it used to be that in the pagan, throughout the whole Old Testament, starting with Abraham even, they always constructed altars. And there was always an altar to God, and they would sacrifice, and there would be these channels. We were actually, when we were on Mount Athos just a week or two ago, the Mount Athos was actually inhabited before the monks were there by the Greeks, pre-Christian Greeks. And we actually found, kind of in the wilderness, an altar that had been constructed with channels. They typically carved channels into it for the blood to run. And so in the pagan rituals, they would even drink blood sometimes, but God forbid this. Yahweh, the God of Israel, forbid this. And so he instructed the priests to collect. They still collected the blood in bowls, as was common, but they were instructed to pour the blood into the base of the altar. And they also took the blood sometimes, and typically Middle Eastern altars had 4 horns, one at each corner. And they would take the blood and they would wash the horns, which was a way of cleansing the altar from the sins that accumulated it. The sins of the people kind of accumulated and stuck to the altar, was the way they kind of thought of it. And so this blood cleansed the altar. So blood was a cleansing agent, but it also could defile when it wasn't used properly. right? So it all depended, blood was a very powerful thing, but it depended on how it was used. And we see this kind of carry over into the New Testament when we have the Eucharist. And Saint Paul says, for example, in 1 Corinthians 12, that when we take the body and blood of Christ, some people who take it in an unworthy manner take it unto their condemnation. Some have gotten sick and died because they're not using it properly. This powerful cleansing agent can cleanse us from sins when used properly, but it can also defile us when it's used in an unworthy manner. So this is what the blood is, this idea of the blood as a cleansing agent, so it can make white, meaning pure. Alright. Alright, so 7:15. Therefore, they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. It's also translated in the RSV as he who sits upon the throne will shelter them with his presence. So in other words, he will be among them, he will protect them, etc. 16, they shall neither hunger anymore nor thirst anymore. The sun shall not strike them nor any heat. Alright, so this is almost exactly the language from Isaiah 49:10, which is talking about the salvation of the future age. There in Isaiah 49:10, it says, they will not hunger or thirst, nor will the scorching heat or sun strike them down. For he who has compassion on them will lead them and will guide them to springs of water. Alright, so remember that, he will guide them to springs of water, he who has compassion on them will lead them and guide them to springs of water. So the very next verse in Revelation is what? 17. For the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne will shepherd them and lead them to living fountains of waters. Right, so he's clearly playing on this idea from Isaiah 49, which is describing the future age, the age to come. So, which is what we're in now, when we're in this kind of vision of the throne room. And here, of course, in Revelation, he who has compassion on them is the Lamb, Jesus. Then it says at the end of verse 17, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. So this is an allusion to Isaiah 25:8. It's almost an exact quote. And again, in Isaiah 25:8, it's talking about the messianic banquet that will happen with the Messiah at the end of the age, at the resurrection. So all of this is telling us that any of those readers who are familiar with Isaiah are going to, what Isaiah saw in a prophecy about the end of the age and the kingdom to come, now John is seeing it. Now it's happening now. This is it. This is what was predicted. Alright, so that concludes chapter 7, which is this interlude. Any questions? Yeah.
When was this time of tribulation that you described?
Considered from like 500 BC until the present, because he's talking in the present tense. So John is written in 96 AD, so something like that. Which would have included the destruction of the temple also in 70.
A horrible tribulation will come after the rapture. We will need the rapture.
Yeah, there's a lot of different theories about Revelation. That's why it's so confusing.
Yeah.
Alright, so chapter 8. In chapter 8, the action resumes and we get back to the opening of the 7th seal. So the 6 seals have been opened. We had this pause in chapter 7 to describe the church on earth and the church in heaven. And now we're about to open the 7th seal. 8:1 it says, when he opened, he the Lamb, Jesus, opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. Alright, so what one of the fathers of the church, one of the early fathers, Ecumenius, he says, what is the loosing of the 7th seal? It is the second coming of Christ and the giving of blessings as rewards. For although some are handed over to the punishment of sinners, nonetheless, in other words, some are sent for condemnation and punishment. Nonetheless, it is the aim of Christ and the intention of the incarnation, the very point of the incarnation, that everyone become an heir of his kingdom. Everyone. So God didn't intend for anyone to be sent to punishment, but man by his choice can choose to follow the path of evil. Therefore, he says, when the 7th seal was loosed, there was, it says, silence for about half an hour, since the king of creation was coming, and every angelic and supernatural power, astounded at the exceeding greatness of the glory of him who was coming, for that reason became silent. So,
What do you think the significance of half an hour?
yeah, I don't know why half an hour. And the silence is something that, in Habakkuk, it says, for example, the Lord is in his holy temple, let all the earth be silent before him. Zephaniah, Zechariah also have these images of silence in the presence of God, just kind of this stunned awe. But I don't know why half an hour. I didn't find anything about that.
Do you think that like when Jesus does come,
Yeah.
that the whole world will be completely quiet? Except for the sound of the trumpet?
Yeah. And on Holy Saturday, there's a great hymn that we sing, let all mortal flesh keep silence. And that's actually on our tabernacle that we have on the altar. It's what's written, let all mortal flesh keep silence. We're in the presence of God now.
So half an hour can be figurative.
Yeah.
In other words, it could be a day, it could be a month, it could be whatever.
Yeah, I don't know why.
The God's
You know,
time.
God's time.
God's time, God's,
Alright, verse 2, so now we're getting on to, we have this like series of 7 throughout Revelation. We have the 7 letters, we have the 7 seals, now we're gonna have the 7 angels, and then there's gonna be 7 bowls. So there's a series of 7 that are unfolding. So verse 2 here, he says, and I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. So the 7 angels of the presence, in the presence of God. So here's what we can reconstruct are the names of the 7 angels of the presence. Uriel is one of the angels, which means fire of God. Raphael, which means God has healed. Raguel, friend of God. Michael, of course, we all know, which means who is like God. Sariel, prince of God. Gabriel, which we all know, God is my strength. And Remiel, 7th, which probably means something like thunder of God or height of God. These are the names of the 7 angels that encircle God according to scripture and tradition.
What's the first one?
First one was Uriel.
Your notes, are they online or are they just your notes?
They're just my notes. I can give them to
Can we
you.
share them to
Yeah,
us?
yeah.
So is the third one, please, after Raphael?
Raphael,
No, after Raphael.
Raguel,
How do you spell that?
R-A-G, Raguel.
Huh,
He's gonna share the notes with us.
never heard of it.
Alright. So why the trumpets? So trumpets.
Excuse me, Father, are you gonna post those somewhere?
Send me an email and I'll send it to you.
All right, done, thank you.
Alright. Alright, so why the trumpets? The trumpets were used for celebrations, to call sacred assemblies or military assemblies, as a summons to battle, as military signals or alerts, or often the trumpets were sounded warning of impending invasions. So it's probably in this last sense, so kind of like an alarm that would sound because something terrible is coming. It's probably in this last sense, which is the one the prophets usually use, this image of the trumpets, and it's probably, this is why Revelation uses it, because something bad is about to happen. That when these trumpets sound, these calamities are going to come upon the earth. So the first 4, John's trumpet angels call forth 4 great calamities upon the physical universe, which we'll read now in chapter 8, and then 2 demonic plagues upon unrepentant mankind in chapter 9. Those are the first 6 of the trumpets. Alright, verse 3, 8:3. Then another angel, having a golden censer, came and so not one of the 7 trumpet angels. Another angel having a golden censer came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. Alright, so the angel is fulfilling the task, is what people would have thought in their minds as normally the priest's duty. Here the angel is filling the role of the priest in the earthly temple, right? So in the earthly temple, the Holy of Holies was considered the throne of God. Then there was a curtain, there was a thick curtain. So the Holy of Holies was actually, a fairly small room. And then you had a curtain And then right in front of the curtain, just outside the Holy of Holies, you had the altar of incense. And this is where the priests spent most of their time. So you can see how it's correlating with our current church, right? And then behind the priest, so you had the Holy of Holies, curtain, altar of incense, priest, and then there was another curtain or barrier. So there were two curtains which separated the area of the priests from the rest of the people, right? So a lot of times here people get confused because all the time they'll talk about, oh, well, the curtain was torn, so that's why we don't have priests anymore, and that's what Protestants will say. This is why we don't have priests anymore, because the curtain was torn when Jesus was crucified, and this barrier has been torn down. Yes, the curtain on the Holy of Holies was torn, not the one separating the priest from the people. So the Holy of Holies became open, right? So that's what we see in our church architecture, is that Christ is enthroned on the altar, on the back of the altar, then you have the altar, then you have the priest, then you have the separation between the priest and the people. So it's exactly as you would imagine it to be after the crucifixion of Christ, when that one curtain, the first curtain of the Holy of Holies has been torn and set apart.
And now you said the incense of the altar incense.
The altar of incense, so that's where they would offer the incense, which was commanded by God in the Old Testament to be offered at the morning and the evening. Incense, which is what the basis for our services of Orthodox and Vespers. Orthodox, we tend to associate it with liturgy, but really Orthodox can stand alone. Like in the monasteries and in some cathedrals, they'll do Orthodox every day and Vespers every day, which really should do probably. Because this is corresponding to the morning and evening services of the temple, which were held every day. And at those morning and evening services, the main thing that they did was offer incense to God.
So is that why our incense, our piñata is set up against the back of the iconostasios before the altar? Is that
Could be,
configured that way?
I think probably it's just practical,
It's
to
practical,
bring
yeah.
it.
But the order you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, we
it's-
offer the incense in front of the altar, and then we go around, and here's where it's gonna allude to this. Then the censer was like, you had the altar of incense where they would actually have the burning coals, and you would throw the incense onto it. But you could also take they had tongs, and they had a censer that it talks about here, the angel with a golden censer. They would take the tongs and they would put a coal in this mobile censer and put incense in it, and then they would go around and they would mark off the sacred space and they would purify the space. So it's exactly what we do still.
Do you think that when the second curtain is torn into is when Jesus Christ comes back again?
That's a good way to look at it.
Because the first one opened salvation to everybody,
Yes, yes.
but you still have it, but then the second one is judgment. When
And even during Bright Week, I don't know if you all noticed, but during Bright Week, the tradition is to leave all the doors on the iconostasis open,
yeah,
signifying that this enmity between God and man has been broken down. But really, you see it most where the priest is directly in, there's no longer a separation between the priest representing the people and God. That's been broken down. He's right there.
I'm confused about what the iconostasis is then. Is that the one closest to the
That's the second curtain, separating the priest's space from the people's space.
Okay, and where would the first curtain have been if it were
First curtain would have been in the Holy of Holies,
behind the altar?
behind the altar, correct,
I see.
yeah. Alright, so, here we're gonna get this idea of what do they do with the incense. So verse 4, it says, "And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints ascended before God from the angel's hand." So you always have this idea of the incense representing, tied with the prayers of the saints, which is the incense, going up to heaven, the prayers of the people going up to heaven. Verse 5, "Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar," meaning that was it means literally that's what they call the burning charcoal, fire. Filled it with burning charcoal from the altar and threw it to the earth. And there were noises, thunderings, lightnings, and an earthquake. So remember we said that the censer was taken as a mobile purifying device, so it's being used to purify the earth now, but in a kind of violent way, which is what we're gonna see.
So why do Protestants have so much against it when it's all right here?
They just interpret it differently. It's not even like early Protestants, like from the 1500s. It's
No,
only in the
it's
last
early.
like 200 years that the radical Reformation, things have really kind of taken a sharp turn. The original Protestants really weren't, they still had altars, they still, Lutherans, for example, still had altars. But yeah, it's like the Baptists, the radical reformers.
And it's also like all the prostrations that we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah,
People, say when they see people doing that, they think they're Muslims and stuff.
yeah,
But
yeah,
that was being done from the early churches.
Oh,
the
yeah.
Christian churches
absolutely.
started, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's almost like what Pompey was saying, these people worship only with their mind, there's been a move in the Enlightenment period to kind of just focus our worship in our mind, not all of our bodies. So I think that's why they've gotten away, and then why it's become really, you can see the transformation of the church architecture too in Protestantism, where it used to be the altar was the center. And slowly the pulpit became the center, the pulpit became bigger and bigger and became the center point. Like if you used to go to Wittenberg in Germany, I was reading someone's account of their visit there to Luther's church. It still had an altar, but the pulpit was enlarged and enlarged and enlarged because the sermon became the center point of the service rather than the sacrifice.
I think Luther say something like, I stand with the Orthodox or.
I'm not sure, but that could be because there's this
Read that somewhere.
There's a book called the Tübingen Correspondence, which catalogs all these letters back and forth from the early Protestant reformers like Luther with Patriarch Jeremias III, I think, of Constantinople. And they went back and forth because the Protestants like Luther didn't want to break from the church. They felt like they had to. And so they were seeking, maybe to come in under the Orthodox Church. But so they were asking all these questions about like faith versus works, etc. And the patriarch kept writing back and answering what the Orthodox position was on infant baptism, on faith versus works, etc. And finally, they kept coming back with such detailed questions. Finally, he said, "Stop writing." He just, they just, yeah. Which is very Orthodox. We can answer a question to a point, but if you wanna keep pressing it, like eventually, yeah.
There it
Yeah,
is,
mystery.
it says he did defend the Orthodox.
Oh,
Oh, really?
Mhm.
I know, I read it.
I didn't know
He
that.
vigorously defended the Orthodox Church, it said.
Nice. Alright, so let's see. 8:6, so he's just thrown down the censer onto the earth from heaven. 8:6, so the seven angels who had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound. Alright, so what's gonna happen now with the judgments that are brought forth by the sounding of the trumpets is really it evokes the 10 plagues of Exodus, right? So 8:7, the first angel sounded, and hail and fire followed, mingled with blood, and they were thrown to the earth. And a third of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. So hail was the seventh plague from Exodus 9. 8:8, then the second angel sounded, but something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood, and a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. So this is like the first plague in Exodus 7:20, which reads, so Moses and Aaron did even as the Lord had commanded. And he lifted up the staff and struck the water that was in the Nile, in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants. And all the water that was in the Nile was turned to blood. The fish that were in the Nile died, and the Nile became foul, so that the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile. And the blood was through all the land of Egypt. So you can see this clear kind of echo of the first plague. 8:10, and the third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. So remember the stars, and for the pagans, stars were associated with divinities, and for the Jews, stars were associated with angels. So when it says a great star fell from heaven, it's usually like an angel, or if it's a fallen angel, it could be a demon. And it fell on a third of the waters and on the springs of water. The name of the star is wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many died from the water because it was made bitter. Then the fourth angel sounded, and a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them were darkened. A third of the day did not shine, and likewise the night. So this echoes the ninth plague in Exodus 10. Alright, and then 8:13, and I looked and I heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because of the remaining blasts of the trumpet of the three angels who are about to sound. So now we have the fifth, sixth, and seventh remaining. Then the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fallen from heaven to the earth. So again, this an angel. To him, the star, which really is an angel, to him was given the key to the bottomless pit. Sometimes it's translated as the abyss. And he opened the bottomless pit, and smoke arose out of the pit like the smoke of a great furnace. So the sun and the air were darkened because of the smoke of the pit. So some people, and many Jewish traditions spoke about evil angels imprisoned in dungeons or in rivers. That, for example, is why there was this idea that there was a demon in the Jordan River coming from ancient, from the Canaanites. And that's what part of what we see sometimes in the icon of the theophany. You'll see this serpent creature in the water. That's because it's this idea that there was this demon in the Jordan River that Christ comes, he descends into the Jordan in order to expel this demon. So in the Jewish tradition, evil angels were sometimes imprisoned in dungeons under the earth or rivers, awaiting their time to come out and wreak havoc. So and some people thought it was a real geographical place that could be found on earth. Like, for example, when it talks about the gates of Hades, that was an actual place where it was like a cave into a mountain that I would assume led into some kind of underground cave system. And some people thought that the gates to this, and it was kind of gated up. Some people thought that was the entrance into Hades. So some people thought it was an actual physical place. And in Jewish tradition, angels were assigned over such sites and given keys to them. So that's this image of the star falling from heaven. To him was given the key to the bottomless pit. So where these demons are waiting to come wreak havoc on the earth, and he opens the bottomless pit, and here comes the smoke. So we assume that now other bad things are gonna come. Alright, so we're in chapter 9 now. 9:3. Then out of the smoke locusts came upon the earth, and to them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. So this recalls the eighth plague from Exodus 10:12, the locusts. John's vision, however, transforms these locusts into something much more terrifying. In the prophet Joel in the Old Testament, he describes an imminent locust plague in terms of armies gathering. And also with this image of a kind of final war. So bad were the locusts. It says in Joel that it was the worst locust ever up until that time, and that will ever be again. So John borrows Joel's imagery here of this kind of army of locusts to amplify the image of the locust plague into this kind of terrible invasion. Alright, so the locusts, it says in verse 4, 9 and 4, were commanded not to harm the grass of the earth, or any green thing, or any tree, but only those men who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. So that takes us back to the beginning of chapter 7, which we did last time, many weeks ago, with the 144,000 who were sealed on their forehead by God, so which represented the church on earth. So those who have been sealed, we would say chrismated, that's with the sign of the cross, or who seal ourselves with the sign of the cross. We have been kind of protected by God from this invasion. So yeah, ordinary locusts, of course, would have feasted on vegetation and left people alone. Here it's reversed. And they, the locusts, were not given authority to kill them. but to torment them for 5 months. Their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it strikes a man. So yeah, scorpion stings were among the most intense pains. But of course, a scorpion sting wouldn't last 5 months. So why the 5 months? Well, the best explanation I could find was that 5 months fits the approximate lifespan of a normal kind of locust. So locusts typically would invade for 3 to 5 months. So that's probably where he gets this idea of 5 months from, that they would, these locusts, these terrible locusts that were like a scorpion or a serpent, like an army, would torment man, not kill him, because God protected them with his seal, but would torment man and the earth for 5 months for the season of the locust. Verse 6. In those days, men will seek death and will not find it. They will desire to die, and death will flee from them. The shape of the locust was like horses prepared for battle. On their heads were crowns of something like gold, and their faces were like the faces of men. They had hair like women's hair, and their teeth were like lions' teeth. Alright, so this is borrowing again from Joel, his description of the locust. He describes the locust as like war horses. And then Joel also describes the locust as having teeth like lions. So he's borrowing this image, or the imagery is the same that the prophet Joel saw. And the teeth like lions would emphasize their destructiveness, especially to the crops. This would of course terrify an agrarian society like we have here, because it would mean no food. And the hair like women is a strange image, but probably the best guess is that everyone in the Roman Empire knew that the barbarians, those who lied outside the empire, like the Parthians to the east, unlike most people in Greco-Roman society, had long hair. So it was probably this terrifying image of these barbarians who they feared come and invade them. Verse 9. And they had breastplates, these locusts, like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the sound of chariots with many horses running into battle. So again, borrowing this military imagery from Joel, the swarms would be so intense that they would sound like an invading army, and great enough to make the earth quake. Verse 10, they had tails like scorpions, and there were stings in their tails. Their power was to hurt men 5 months. Not kill though, but hurt, torment. 11. And they had as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit, the star that fell, the one who had the key, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, but in Greek he has the name Apollyon. So Abaddon is a Hebrew name for the lowest depths of the earth, the realm of the dead. Apollyon means destruction in Greek. So the final terrifying touch to this description of an army with elements from Joel's locusts, from the Parthians, these terrifying barbarians, from scorpions, is that these are the armies of hell, sent by death itself to fill its bowels, right? So it's supposed to be this terrifying imagery. Yeah,
I'm looking back to see where it was. Oh, it's 5,
yeah,
4 and 5. I'm confused about why you're clear, and they were not given authority to kill them, that the antecedent is the ones who have the seal. I thought it was just all humans, but you implied, I thought that they were not
could
given.
be, yeah, you're right. But only those men who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Is that important?
I don't know. Well, it struck me that this was saying from what you said,
Yeah.
that these locusts had the power, had the authority to kill or
Not
to torment for 5 months.
Yeah.
But
not
those who have
necessarily
the
just-
seal.
Right, yeah, you're right.
I was
Could be.
worrying about myself
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, these locusts sound terrifying.
I would have been tormented for 5 months. A stinging scorpion like locusts.
You're right,
It's worse.
yeah, so it does not
They
sound.
use worse, see their picture.
Or something else.
But as you said, when you do your cross, you're putting the seal.
The seal on yourself, yeah, that's what they,
Protecting yourself.
in the early Christian texts, they call it the seal. So like, even from 150, we have texts that are talking about the Christian, describing the Christians making the seal on themselves, which means making the sign of the cross. Yeah,
I just have a question about the Greek word score, because this came out the other day in biblical Greek. And
score,
SCORP,
oh,
and Jim Wright looked it up, and it means to cut.
okay,
So a scorpion, I mean, why do they call a scorpion? If the pain is the stinging, so what's cutting?
I don't know, that's a good question. I don't know what the etymology of scorpion is exactly, the scorp must be an ancient Greek word that.
He said it comes from Indo-European,
Okay.
he looked it up and that's what he said.
Okay, yeah, so that's where, probably where we get score from in Latin, it's the
Score.
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 But I don't know about score, I mean, because it fell out in Greek. So Indo-European is like this hypothetical language that preceded Latin, Sanskrit, and Greek. So Latin and Sanskrit and Greek, if you study them as linguists, you can find there are these similarities between the three of them, and so they speculate that there must have been this pre-existing unified language called Indo-European. These are non-religious people who, speculate this, but it also and then they speculate too about how long it would have taken to change into three different languages, and it takes us to about 5000 BC, which is exactly when the Tower of Babel is supposed to have happened. So it seems that the linguists have kind of confirmed this, even if you're not a religious person, that something happened around 5000 BC to divide the languages, and that the Bible is recording this in a historical way, maybe using figurative language, but still something probably happened then. All right, 9:12. One woe is past. Behold, still two more woes are coming after these things. So the sixth and the seventh trumpet angels. 9:13, then the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God. We just talked about that, the four horns on the corners. Saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. Euphrates runs through modern day Iraq, and it was widely considered the traditional boundary between the Roman Empire and the East, the Parthians at this time. So it was kind of like beyond the Euphrates was wild enemy land. So the four angels who had been prepared for the hour and day and month and year were released to kill a third of mankind. Now the number of the army of the horsemen was 200 million. I heard the number of them. So 200 million was, the best estimates for the Roman Empire at this time, probably the whole Roman Empire was probably something like 60 million. So 200 million is an incredible number. And 17, and thus I saw the horses in the vision. Those who sat on them had breastplates of fiery red, hyacinth blue, and sulfur yellow. And the heads of the horses were like the heads of lions, and out of their mouths came fire, smoke, and brimstone. Alright, so the hyacinth blue might allude to the color of the smoke of sulfur's flame. By these three plagues, a third of mankind was killed, by the fire and the smoke and the brimstone which came out of their mouths. For their power, so this could represent, because it's coming out of the Euphrates, maybe you could take it symbolically as that the Parthians, these barbarians to the east, would invade and inflict this on people, this destruction and devastation. For their power is in their mouth and in their tails. For their tails are like serpents having heads, and with them they do harm. So this is interesting, giving kind of credence to that theory that it's alluding to the Parthians coming in as God's instrument and destroying a third of the humans there. The Parthian cavalry was famous for something unique, that they would fire archery from the rear of their horses. Right, so they would be riding on their horses, and they wouldn't be firing forward, they would fire backwards. And so here the power in their tails, like scorpions, may refer to the arrows that they would shoot from the rear of the horse. Alright. But the rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues did not repent of the works of their hands, that they should not worship demons and idols of gold, silver, brass, stone, and wood, which can neither see nor hear nor walk. And they did not repent of their murders or their sorceries or their sexual immorality or their thefts. So, yeah, Jewish people commonly regarded the unrepentance of the world in the face of obvious judgments. So for example, going back to the 10 plagues, as a sign of stupidity, right? So they interpreted like the 10 plagues on Egypt, like how stupid could the Pharaoh be after the first, the second, the third, like let him go already, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a sign of stupidity not to heed the judgment. That pagans worship demons was also widely accepted in Jewish circles. Idolatry and immorality were standard parts of Greco-Roman culture. Thieves and sorcerers, however, idolatry and sexual immorality were standard parts of Greco-Roman culture, which they were the two kind of big no-nos of biblical culture, idolatry and sexual immorality. Thieves and sorcerers, which are listed here also, were considered dangerous by everybody. Alright, so that is the end of, we finished 7, we did 8 and 9, that's all the notes I have. So
Continue.
we can have questions now, we'll start with 10 next time. Any questions, thoughts?
I apparently missed something on why it was a third instead of
Yeah.
everything.
That's a good question, I don't know,
Oh.
I think in the Old Testament plagues, it says something about a third, so it's probably taking it from there.
Okay.
But when I think of it, there's lots of, I'm-
It's three, that's
Yeah, that's what I'm
probably-
saying.
and if you look,
Trinity.
maybe, I don't know why a third, but
Okay.
you
I should have explained it and I missed it.
you see it repeat, it's probably just coming out of the language of the third, I think there was in the 10 plagues, something about a third of the vegetation being destroyed or something like that, it's probably just.
It's always-
Yeah, I think it's just repeating the language of the plagues, but there's some kind of modern prophecies too that circulate in the Orthodox world. I mean, I don't really hear them so much here in the US, but like in Greece, they circulate a lot. Like certain elders predicting that, and a lot of times the predictions will involve a third. So the big prophecy that kind of became famous in the 20th century was this prophecy that a third, that the Russians were gonna come down to Turkey. And that a third of the Turks would be killed, a third would repent and become Christian. And a third would remain or something like that, and then the Russians would retake Constantinople and give it to the Greeks. This was a. This is like something. So this is
One
good.
thing was-
Like Saint Taisios talks about it. They never say like this is what's gonna happen for sure, but it was a popular.
It's a lot of thirds.
Yeah, it was a popular prophecy, you'll still hear it repeated, especially in Greece. Because, yeah, and I would always say, so the Russians are just gonna give the Greeks, yeah.
Cause they're so sweet.
You wanna talk Putin today?
Yeah,
With the incense that it talks about in here.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a protocol for how we do the divine liturgy. I mean, in other words, we don't have incense fill up the altar throughout the divine liturgy.
right,
We only have it at
certain times.
certain times. Can you
Yeah.
explain that a little bit?
No.
Okay.
I don't know, I don't know, I'm sure there's a reason why we sense at the times we sense,
Yeah.
but I don't know it offhand about, the correlation, the correspondence between why at the certain times and how
Yeah.
it corresponds to ancient practice in the temple. But, it wouldn't surprise me at all if there is a correlation, because the church doesn't just do things randomly,
Yeah,
There's always a reason. That's the beautiful thing about the Orthodox Church is that you'll never stop learning. There's always a reason.
yeah, you always grow.
Anything out on Zoom? Anybody have any comments? Who's Catherine?
They fell
Not me, Father. I'm just trying to take it all in.
Okay. Alright, well, if nobody else has anything, then we'll meet in 2 weeks.